analyze what each of the signs in their general statement of the stars mean, you've got pretty much the entire gospel painted out there. And every one of these titles is talking about Christ. As I said, you know, if you explain to me, I take a challenge for anyone. Tell me that Muhammad can fit every one of these. Krishna? ISIS? I don't know. Then you tell me. I need to say a couple of words because some of you present very interesting challenges to me. Okay. So please try to understand that what I'm doing right now is very general. It's very broad. Yes, a couple of you who are the pseudo-experts in life, well, you know, there's not enough detail there, you know, complaining. Okay, listen, this is what happens. You know, when I've done biblical translation, for example, it's a small group of people that will stay with me, and a large group says, you're losing me. You get into the language, you get into the grammar. So recognize that a lot of presentation has to be kept in a more generic way until we decide either to take a deep dive or take, you know, a deeper, better look. Presenting things in a general way is not going to do the subject the greatest justice, but it will paint the broadest picture so everyone can come along. So cut me some slack out there, okay? It's just a handful of people that seem to think like, well, I can just bombard the congregation, which most of the time I like to do. But this is a subject that I need everybody along. And you know, we can say, yes, there's basic Christianity in here, of course, but there's a point to what I'm trying to do. We'll encounter the same thing. I know that I'm going to be presenting some very odd messages. When I say odd, because the sources to be able to make my presentations will come from the least likely places. Like I told you, right now we're doing the Gospels in the Stars to answer the question, did Jesus exist? And if you notice that most of the things that we have looked at in the last few messages, the names of those stars in each constellation were placed there so far back in antiquity. And you could say, well, the scripture says God named the stars or he gave them for signs, yes. But when we're looking, we see either Arabic or Hebrew, very little Latin penetrated into this art of looking into the sky. But the big thing that we have to be aware of is that when you're seeing as much repetition about words, for example, the Redeemer, the pierced one, I mean, and it's over and over and over and over and over again, you have to say, as I've said, there is no way that this could fit any other person of history. That opens up, as I said, another study that I want to look at, still in the sky, to understand a little bit better when people make claims that, for example, there was a comet or there was an eclipse at the time of Christ's birth, or these things happened. I'd like to take a look at those, absolutely. But the reason for going down this pathway is to answer the question, did Jesus exist? So you say to me, well, how are you going to do this from the stars? Well, if you look at everything that's up there, starting with Virgo the Virgin and moving through the decans that belong to, because each sign, each zodiac sign has, we'll call them accompanying stars and signs. So, for example, we looked at Virgo the Virgin, which we see her right here. And this particular image has her upright, but usually she is prostrate. She is facing usually down. We've got enough from just that one vignette, if you will, to look at the decans that belong to that. Coma, the infant, the branch, the desired one, that is within Virgo the Virgin, and the decans that belong to it. Centaurus, the dual-natured being, Bothes or Buddhis, the great shepherd holding a rod or a sickle. We moved on to Libra, the scales, the balance is up and down, the act of weighing. And I told you that is the act of punishment and also of rewards. In the decans of Libra, we see the cross, the slain victim, which I addressed. This particular image has the inscription lupus, wolf, but usually others represent other animals, not the wolf or the lupus. But the victim slain, pierced to death, the crown which the serpent tries to take. Hopefully you can remember some of these images that we saw. So here is Virgo the Virgin, here is Coma, the mother and child, all right? Bothes here with the sickle in hand. I moved on, well, here is the victim, the dual-natured person, the cross. Libra in the scales, again, the imagery here, it's how the author illustrated it for this particular map, but there are different images that have different looks to them. So Libra, here we saw the serpent going up for the corona borealis, and moved through that to, let's see where we are, Scorpio, the scorpion, tail lifted as in a striking position. The decans of Scorpion, the serpent struggling with, I got to say his name right, Ophiuchus. Ophiuchus wrestling with the serpent, appearing to perhaps be stung in one heel, but being in the act of crushing with another. Hercules wounded in the heel, the other foot over the dragon's head, in one hand the fruit, the other the three-headed dog of hell. So let's look here. We've got Scorpion. Here is the man handling the snake, serpents, if you will. Hercules above it. So in all of the imagery that we looked at, and again, that, as I said, from map to map, depending on which map, which zodiac of preference you're looking at, the images will be pretty much the same. There are a few, and as I said, in a few areas. One of them that on this here is depicted as, let's see, the lyra has, it's a harp with wings. In some images, it is a complete eagle and only the breast underneath is a harp. So I don't know if that makes a difference, but I'm just giving you the information to kind of get us up to where we were. All right, Hercules wounded in the heel, the other foot over the dragon's head, in one hand fruit, and the other is the three-headed dog of hell. Sagittarius, the bowman, again a dual-natured creature, bow and arrow aimed at the scorpion. Here the decans of Ara, the altar. So we have here the arrow aimed in this direction. We have the altar here, all right, Ara, the altar, and the lyra, or the lyre, signs of, for example, the lyra is the worship, we'll say, like the scripture says, to make a joyful noise. Usually we've got depictions of that, triumphant sounding worship or gladness. Capricornus, or Capricorn, the goat, facing down as if injured or falling, with the hind part of the body terminating in the tail of a fish. So we can take the image of something having to die to be transformed. Out of death comes the sacrificial ram. That brings abundant life, depicted by the fish. The decans, Sagitta, the arrow, the fiery dart, Aquila, the eagle pierced and falling, Delphinus, the dolphin. This is all review from the last few messages. Breaching the waters, representing our resurrected life coming out of the watery grave. Aquarius, the waterman, a figure of a man holding an urn, and out of which a constant flow of water. The decans of Aquarius. The southern fish drinking in the stream. Pegasus, a winged white horse spreading good tidings. The swan, bearing the sign of the cross. Pisces, the fishes, the large fish tethered by their tails, bound by a bridle or band, held down by the foot of Aries. And we see this, I'm going to have to, I think, turn. So I'm going to ask the camera to not take the shot. There, as I had my head in the shot too, and I'm not trying to make anybody sick. All right. So here, Aquarius, we saw the two fish. I'm going to turn it once more. Sorry, folks. Here, Aries, the foot over both tethered fish. All right. And so when we get to Aries, there is always this connection to the ram, sometimes called the lamb. The decans in Aries, Cassiopeia, the enthroned woman. Cetus, the strange-looking sea monster, closely perched near the lamb, and Perseus, the arm-mighty man with wings on his ankles, carrying the head of a monster that's full of serpents, holding a great sword in his right hand. If you keep looking at all of these images, they actually, in some ways, are repetitive. You know, it's either a sword, a sickle, or a club, right? You've got people who are attempting to stomp on something, and wings, serpents, they're repetitive signs that are here. Today, we will start looking at the sign of Taurus. So let me point out where we are. We should be in good visibility. There's Taurus right there. So if you can see, the way this is clustered, Aries is kind of on top, or you know, you could look at the image that way, but, and then Taurus, I want you to take a look. Some of the older manuscripts regarding this subject will say one horn, but that's not so. Almost each and every one of these refer to a bull, 2 horns. Not that that is going to make or break anything, but I just thought I'd say that in passing. They all bear the same, so all the zodiacs, they all bear the same, it's just, this is an image of a bull, all right? Except the horns are greater, and the toes have horns as well. I don't know, I didn't make the drawing, okay? All right, so this symbol is supposed to represent Christ as swift judge, offering swift judgment. The chief star in this sign is Aldebaran, the leader, the captain. The middle and extreme part of the raging animal includes the figure of the ram or Aries emerging from or around the bull. So I want you to take a good look at this because everything works together in here. So you can see that Aries has the leg over the 2 fishes, but Aries is also kind of buttressed up against Taurus. And you can see, I want to point out the stars. So those bright, or the brightest ones, right here. There's another cluster over here. And they all of the names kind of point, as I said, they're all attached to the Bible. All right, so what we see here could be the indignation of the Lord upon the nations, his fury upon, the Bible talks a lot about this. The Old Testament, the New Testament kind of puts it in a different language, but it's the same concept. God's fury or wrath to punish the inhabitants of the earth for their iniquity, when at a time he will no longer keep silent. So when the scripture says, when the earth shall disclose her blood, and shall no more cover her slain, behold, the day of the Lord cometh, cruel with wrath and fierce anger, to lay the land desolate and to destroy sinners thereof out of it. So let me just pause here for a second. There are a lot of people, and I'm hearing this a lot lately, because there's not a lot of great theologians out there anymore. There just isn't. In fact, there are very few modern-day theologians. I'd like to say, if somebody said to me, you know, what would I put myself in, what category? I'd say religious educator and leaning more towards theologian and theology than preaching. And the idea, the modern idea, is you come into church and you just want to feel good. You're never going to learn theology. And theology is learning what's in this book. And the reason why I say that is because you've got people who will say, well, Jesus in the New Testament, doesn't he love everybody? And when he comes back, doesn't he love everybody? And isn't he the God of love? And isn't he going to pour love out on people? No, that's what he's doing now to people that come to him, trusting him and faithing in him. But to those that have stout-heartedly refused, and if you think that I'm just saying this as verbiage, there are people today, in this present time, who are so adamant they do not want to hear the name of Jesus Christ. Don't think I'm talking about Muslims or Jews. Just people in different areas where I don't want to hear about it, don't want to know about it. It's offensive to them. So when I say God will pour out his wrath, those people seem to, I'm not God, so I can't tell you who his target is, but they seem like a prime candidate. And why do I have the right to say that? Well, just look at Jesus in the Bible. He came to his own. What exactly does that mean? He came to his own people. You know, a lot of people get this wrong because they think Jesus and we have Christianity out of the death of Christ. But don't mistake the fact that everything that happened in Jesus' life, from the treatment, we'll say, the customs, the traditions, was all done under the cloak of Judaism. Circumcision, all the practices, the offerings, whatever they did in the temple, all part of under the canopy of Judaism. So when it says he came to his own and his own received him not, I want you to think long and hard about how you would feel. You show up at a family reunion and all the people at that reunion say, "Who are you? Why are you here?" Don't think that it's not going to matter. It's going to matter. And there are just way too many people who are so blatantly flippant. I'll be honest with you, there are a lot of folks, I'm actually praying that with my eyes in my lifetime, I will see certain people gently corrected by God. No, I take out the gently part. I'm talking about, specifically right now, I'm not talking about just lay people. I'm talking about pastors, ministers, priests, you name it, who come to a church, a pulpit, and have completely bastardized the Word of God. They want to use pronouns. They want to introduce themselves to their congregation as a they, them, or a he, be, she, whatever. Not wanting to preach the gospel. That's going to, by the way, that's going to be the first group of people to find out what God's wrath is really like. Why do I say that? Because the Bible says judgment begins at the house of God. That means every $3 bill in a pulpit who's trying to fleece the congregation, that means every, gotta watch my tongue, every lie that is conceived under the guise of motivating, and whether that taps into greed or anything you want to talk about in that field, those are the people that need to be dealt with first. Second, after that, and I agree, whoever clapped, I'm clapping inside, okay? But after that, there's another group of people that will be next in line, and those are the people that sat in a church every Sunday but didn't care that the pastor wasn't opening up and making plain the Word of God. You gathered for some Hollywood celebrity who looks good in their new outfit or their latest plastic surgery or whatever they've done to themselves, that just keep pouring it on. It's like, this is not a mistake. God's going to pour out his wrath first on the ones who are misleading the flock, and then on the people who just think God's just like a boat and they can be a barnacle on it. Don't you think long and hard about that? So when we talk about God pouring out his wrath, make no mistake, what the Bible says is a terrible, terrible picture of what God says he's going to do, and he has to do it. Otherwise, if God does not mete out that justice, God is not God. It's like the justice system, right? Somebody commits a terrible crime, they commit a murder, they kill somebody, and they don't even get a sentence. Well, that opens the door for anybody else to say, hey, well, there's no consequence there. I'm going to do the same. This is why we have lots of smash and grabs. No consequence. Well, you're not going to get in any trouble whatsoever. But you really think God looking down goes, yeah, it's okay. You can go into a store and steal for under $1,000. I won't judge you. You think that God would be going, yeah, that's good behavior. So, and those are the things we can blatantly see. But the worst affront will be those, like I said, Lord, didn't we do thus and so in your name? Depart from me, I never knew you. So it's important to understand this image of the raging bull is justice being meted out. Just as we saw the balances of Libra reward and punishment, there is the depiction of what will be pouring out the wrath. In the first decans of Taurus is Orion. Now, Orion is mentioned both by Job and Amos, and I find this fascinating because some people put the book of Job as potentially one of the earliest books written outside the Pentateuch. I can't speak on that. It's not even, if people were going to try and tackle that to try and date the book to find out when it was written, good luck. It's very complex. And you might say, well, there are some telltale signs. There's things that are not even mentioned in there that are mentioned elsewhere. Well, let me not take that sidebar. All right. So Orion, the figure is a giant hunter with a mighty club in his hand, in his right hand, in the action of slaying or striking. In his left hand, the remains of a slain lion. Captain and prince of hunters, Orion, the brilliant, the swift. The book of Job says Orion is an invincibly girded, I got to say this right, Betelgeuse, whatever that means. That is the star in his right shoulder, which means the coming one or the coming branch. Let's see if we can find this image right here. Orion is right there. He's got the club, and you can see this is a really bad rendering. It looks like a lion's head, but actually in some of the other descriptions I've seen the lion's head being held up with the body in the back. I'm not 100% sure on that, what the image should actually be, but why I find this really interesting is that, just take a look at this. As I said, Job says Orion, an invincibly girded, and it's kind of mind-blowing, because if you didn't know what Job was saying, you wouldn't really kind of make connections. But I think that it's hard to say a star or a constellation is girded. I don't really know how you make that connection, but definitely the man looks like he is in his right shoulder girded. So that Betelgeuse, the name of the star, the coming one or the coming branch. There is another star in his right ankle, Rigel, that is the foot that crushes. Let's see if we can see it right there. Can you see that? Yes. The foot that crushes. And take a look. By the way, I will explain this Eridanus in a minute, but it's very interesting how all of these figures, as I said, they're attached to something. So the foot that crusheth, and in his belt are three called Jacob's rod. So I find it interesting if you start going into the scriptures, the righteousness shall be the girdle of his loins, and faithfulness the girdle of his reins. That's from Isaiah. In his left breast, Al-Mirzam, the ruler, Al-Nagjed, the prince. The second decans of Taurus is Eridanus. You can see it beneath the foot of Orion. It's not a snake. It is a body, a great river, body of water that flows east to west. It is the river of the judge. And if you have followed along with me, that would make sense, because we know that Dan is judge or judgment. So Eri, Danis, the body or water of judgment. Okay. Again, there's all these very interesting connections that we could make. In the book of Daniel, we find the same word having described several bizarre creatures in Daniel 7, verses 9 through 11, reads, I beheld till the throne were set, and the Ancient of Days did sit. His throne was like the fiery flame, and his wheels as a burning fire, a fiery stream, and that's the word Eridanus. A river of fire issued and came forth from behind him. Judgment was set, the books were opened, the prophet beheld, even till the beast was slain, and his body destroyed and given into the burning flame. Psalm 50 verse 3 says, Our God shall come and shall not keep silence. A fire shall devour before him, and it shall be a very tempestuous round about him, or a fire that goeth before him and burneth up his enemies round about him. Psalm 97. So when we say river of fire, I also want you to think that there could be a close connection to another type of body of fire, the lake of fire. So you make these connections and you kind of go, okay, you know what? There's just too many. There's too many coincidences here. What do I do with them, right? But it says here, Eridanus shall receive them up in an unquenchable fire or flame. So that sounds to me very much like the lake filled with fire and brimstone, perhaps. All right, the second decans in Taurus is Auriga, the mighty man seated on the Milky Way, holding a ribbon in his right hand. In his left arm, he holds a she-goat. Let's see if we can find him. All right, so there he is. And it's kind of interesting and very hard to see, but the goat is actually kind of hugging him. All right? So there's all these very interesting figures. This one, the Latin name of Auriga, conductor or possessor of the reins. And a quick look at the man, he looks to be, if you look carefully, he looks to be a shepherd who is the protector of the sheep or of the sheepfold. The chief star, Capella, in the heart of the goat. Behold, the Lord will come with a strong hand, and his arm shall rule for him. Behold, his reward is with him, and his work before him. He shall feed his flock like a shepherd. He shall gather the lambs in his arms and carry them in his bosoms, that shall gently lead those that give suck. I look at this and I think to myself, if all of the imagery here, if this is of judgment, then this says that those that are in the arms of this warrior are safe, they are protected. And that's why I use the key word that is in the interpretation of what's in that depiction, protector, protector of the flock. So the next one here, we're looking at two figures, the sign of Gemini, their feet resting on the Milky Way, their heads leaning close, signifying a bond. One holds a great club in his right hand, the left secured around the other twin or the other individual. The other holds a harp in one hand and a bow and arrow in the other. Now, in mythology, there are many interesting things to talk about concerning Gemini. The Greeks viewed these as two brothers. It's all over the map here. View them as two brothers, sons of Jupiter. They are also said to have been part of Greek mythology. The Argonauts vying for the golden fleece. It all kind of gets interesting, because I don't know if you were to look at this and say, could all of Greek mythology fit in here? Some of it, but not all of it. That's the thing. So everything that you're going to associate, it has to fit everything, or you've got to say it can't be associated with that person. So Greek mythology, yes, you could make the case for that, but not for all the signs. In the Zodiac of Dendera, this symbol is depicted as a man and a woman walking together hand in hand. Some have said represents Adam and Eve. I'm not going to make that claim. All right, I'm just going to say what has been said. And it has also been said that the twins could also signify the first Adam and the last Adam. I can't read that much into that. Just if we're going to talk about what's in the stars, what's in that constellation, but I can't say to that. So I don't want to put information out. This is where I will give you my opinion. I'm not exactly sure that that could be a man and a woman, but it could represent, again, a dual nature, because everything here either has a dual nature, dual sides, two sides to it, so it could align with that. But let's look at what exactly is in, specifically the southern figure, the star El Henna, the wounded, the main star in his head, Pollux, the ruler or the judge, sometimes also called Heracles or Hercules, the mighty warrior who frees the world from the prince, the power of the air, or his magnanimous powers. I don't know. So you could look at that and say it could fit either one. These are some of the more ambiguous problems I might just put out there and say you guys can make your own decisions on this. At the center of his body, there's another star called Wasat, meaning put in place, or he is the hunter or destroyer. Next, there is Canis Major, the dog, and after that, Canis Minor. So you're going to see two dogs. The second dog, as I said, Canis Minor. And there is a second star in Canis Major called Mirzam, the ruler. So let's find where we're looking for the dog. Here is Minor. There is the Minor. And let's look for the major dog, who's more upright. There he is. all right, down at the bottom. So it's kind of interesting, and of course, most of us know this particular star, Sirius star. All right, so Mirzam, the ruler, the star in the body, called Wesen, meaning bright or radiantly shining. Yet another star in the right hind leg, Adhara, the glorious one. The major dog star is made out of 64 stars, and the Canis minor, 14 stars. The brightest star in the body, Procene, which means redeemer. I don't know where you put redeemer inside of a dog, but okay. There's also a star in the neck, Algomesa, enduring for others. We can interpret the Canis major as representing his triumphant return, and Canis minor, his return as our redeemer. We're going to move to the next sign, which is Cancer, the sign of the giant crab. So let me see where I can adjust. We're right here, and I am going to move us this way. So that is the giant crab right there. You're going to see, we'll be looking at, there's a star right there. So the bright ones, the brightest ones, are first magnitude, and as they get smaller and lesser, they are second, third, fourth magnitude stars. So Cancer, the sign of the giant crab, associated, again, kind of connected with the last thing, Messiah's redeemed people. You might say, how does that work? We know that the Egyptians didn't see this sign as a crab for sure. In their understanding of the stars, they saw it as a scarab or a sacred beetle. And we know that in Egyptian culture, the beetle was something very highly venerated. The scarab had this great meaning. But in the earliest records, we go from crab, beetle, but in the earliest records to most of the Hebrew and Arabic writing, it was actually an eagle or a hawk bearing the name Hermes. Not a crab. I don't know, don't ask me. I'm just reporting, okay? The Arabic name inside for the star, Al-Sartan, who holds or who binds. And there is no ancient word for the crab, only things that are closely related to it. So there's no real ancient word for crab. There are words kind of around the crab, but there are no ancient words for that to symbolize that scavenger of the deep, if you want. So this sign has 83 stars in it. The center, a bright cluster of radiance, the brightest star in the tail is called Tegmin, which means to hold on or to hold with a grip. The star in the claw is the hiding place. And of course, when I was looking at all this, I thought, I don't know, I prefer the psalm, hiding under something of the Most High, hiding in the claw of a crab. Isn't that attractive? But, okay. So north and south are two stars. Acellus, you're going to love this one. Let me isolate them for you so you can see what we're talking about when I say what I say. So where are we? We're at the crab. So we're going to be dealing with what's down here, Argo. We're also going to be dealing with, I got to look at this carefully, what I can't see. Inside here, the stars that are inside the crab, the pincers, and there's a whole cluster here as well. All right. Tegmin, as I said, holding. The north and the south, two stars, Acellus, which means ass. That's what it means. Acellus borealis, the northern ass. I'm not making this up, that's what it means. And the southern ass, which is Acellus australis. This sign was often connected to the tribe of Issachar. And in fact, I will show you how most of these signs are assigned to the various tribes. It's kind of interesting, 12 zodiacs, 12 tribes. All right, we'll come back to that one. But why do I say Issachar? Because Issachar bore in the standard for what they walked around with was the image of two asses. Donkeys, all right, that type of an ass, all right. God, guys, come on. You're going to go back to biblical days because there'd only be one understanding back then. All right. Lord help us. So that's why the connection is made. And remember, I told you there are other connections, the connection to the fishes, the dragon that would connect us to Dan. Each has its own, but I'm getting ahead of myself, so I'll calm down. All right. 3 constellations, Ursa Minor, the lesser flock, Ursa Major, the sheepfold and the sheep, and Argo the ship, travelers arriving safely at their destination. So Ursa Minor, most call this the lesser bear, but we know that was not the original name. Equally true of Ursa Major. We have gotten the bear concept from the fact that the principal star inside of Ursa Major is Dubna or Duba or Dobe, the word for bear. But the meaning of the word is not a singular animal. Actually, it is a flock or a fold. So that word that appears is flock or fold. Here's Ursa Minor and Ursa Major. The Greeks referred to Ursa Minor and Major as Arcas or Arctos, the stronghold of the saved. Now, let me take a minute to talk to you about the pole star, and I'm just going to do this really quickly. The pole star used to be called the dragon star. And again, all of these names seem to be you're starting to see a lot of, we'll call it redundant imagery. In the 3rd decan of Cancer, you have Argo, the mysterious ship of Greek mythology or of antiquity, and the brightest star, Canopus, the name of a hero who was the great helmsman, who after being bit by a venomous snake died. This is out of mythology, but the Egyptians worshiped this one as a divine being. In the Zodiac of Dendera, there is a cross suspended from his neck, and the name of the figure is, and I got to say this right, Shis en Fent, rejoicing over the serpent. Now again, you know, it's kind of weird because we're looking at images which are basically dots connected, putting everything together to form the images, but I can't get away from this. Each place has a serpent being trodden underfoot, or the serpent trying to reach or usurp or take. So the imagery here, as I said, very repetitive, but it's driving home the point. I think I'm just going to speed along here because we're going to cover these all day. I was determined to come here and just get it all out, and then next week we can kind of chill out and with a little bit deeper, and I'm going to blow some of these images up so you can see in a bigger way. Leo the lion, and that will bring us to the last sign. So let me see if we can see Leo the lion here, which we should be able to right there. Okay, and you can see there's some pretty bright stars in the tail, by the shoulder area, and somewhere around the neck. So what do we know about Leo the lion? 95 stars make up the whole constellation. The lion's feet are over Hydra, the snake, about to descend and crush it. I don't know. Who do you think that is? I don't know. All right. The Hebrew language calls the lion Aria. Now, most of us who've read, for example, the works of C.S. Lewis, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, who made the connection to Ariel, but it is Aria, the lion. And in Hebrew, there's actually multiple words, if you can believe it, because Hebrew's just kind of all over the map, has multiple words for lion. One is used of a lion hunting down its prey. In Arabic, the word would be El Asad, the lion lunging. In the Zodiac of Dendera, the lion is treading upon the serpent whose name is Pi Menthekion, the poured out one. The verbiage beneath the lion reads Kinem or Nim, the one who conquers or the conquered, referring to the victory over the enemy, the serpent. So we know, listen, we know that Jesus is called the Lion of the tribe of Judah. And I just referenced the work of C.S. Lewis. The brilliance of that work was that most children it used to be required reading in schools. It's probably not anymore because now children have to learn about, I don't know, other things that they shouldn't be learning about, but this was really good material because it gave you a wonderful imaginary child story with fantastic imagination, but it also gave you the gospel cloaked right in there, telling us everything that a child could understand about Jesus Christ in the form of the lion out of his writing. So it's kind of mind-boggling. There's nobody that's going to get confused over this. In the book of Numbers, there's a specific passage regarding Balaam's prophecy. We read, "He shall eat up the nations, his enemies, and he shall break their bones and pierce them through with his arrow. Couched, he laid down as a lion and as a great lion. Who shall stir him up?" That's Numbers 24. Or the prophet that says, "The Lord shall go forth as a mighty man. He shall stir up jealousy like a man of war. He shall cry, yea, he shall roar. He shall prevail against his enemies," roaring as in the lion. Of course, John paints him as, in Revelation, "The lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, hath prevailed to open the book." And again in Revelation, "Worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive power, riches, wisdom." So we have the imagery, which is inescapable, obviously the lion. And the reason why this is so crazy is because you've got the lion and you end up right back by the virgin. So all of the imagery is very fluid. If we were to go through this now and just kind of analyze what each of the signs in their general statement of the stars mean, you've got pretty much the entire gospel painted out there. And every one of these titles is talking about Christ. As I said, if you explain to me, I take a challenge for anyone. Tell me that Muhammad can fit every one of these. Krishna? ISIS? I don't know. Then you tell me. Coincidence? No, okay, maybe, I don't know. The brightest star in Leo is Regulus, treading underfoot. The star in the tip of the tail, Dene Bola, meaning judge or the Lord who cometh. The other star, Al-Yiba, the exaltation or the exalted one. And then what's beneath Leo? Hydra. And keep following Hydra. Now in some areas, sometimes Hydra will be represented as a long snake with many heads. This one only has one. I guess one is enough. But I want you to pay close attention to something very interesting. It's interesting to me at least. Look at how long this takes up almost a third of the imagery. Find it very interesting. Just a third. I don't know, is that a coincidence to how much of heaven he took with him? I don't know. I don't know. So Hydra, though, the old serpent whose length, as I just described, spans almost 1/3 of the sphere. The name means aboard. The main star, El Fard, means the separated. And in another way here, we've got another star there, Minkir al-Sugiya, the ripping to pieces of the deceiver. Okay, there's a little bit more here, so let's take a look. There is a raven, all right? And if you look, the raven is landed. There's a couple of stars inside the raven, Corvus, and crater. And again, both of these, this one looks like it's landed and ready to start picking at. This one is just kind of, it looks like it's on a magic carpet ride, so it's just placed on top. But the bird looks like it's landed. So let's look at this. The cup and Corvus, the raven, 2 stars at the bottom of the cup of wrath that are actually connected to Hydra, the serpent. And the imagery is the cup of his indignation. That would be Revelation 14. The cup of wine of the fierceness of his wrath, Revelation 16. This cup is the divine indignation to be poured out on those who stout-heartedly refuse the notion of a deliverer whose name is Jesus Christ. The raven, who seems to be gripped firmly on Hydra's body. The brightest star in the eye, Al-Shibar. The curse inflicted, the star on the right wing, Al-Goreb. the raven, and the third star, Minkyal al-Gorab, the raven tearing into pieces. So it almost is like an image of the final picture, what we'd be descending onto Hydra the snake, the cup, and something that would be attacking it and bringing it down. So something to consider. And I wanted to just kind of get all this out because unfortunately, this going back and forth and not being able to show you with clarity, I said, you know what, I'm just going to get it all out there and then we can go back. I want to be able to look at this and paint the picture properly and give it the time that it deserves. But what I think is the takeaway, the unfolding of all of this, you see, ends with the serpent meeting his end, and on the face of these stars, it is written indelibly the story of the fall and the restoration of mankind. Satan holds a grip on this world, and much of the imagery, as I said, snakes and crabs and things of that nature, his refusal to let go of God's creation, that should get us all thinking. It kind of goes back to something I was talking about before the message, which is if you believe that he's got that much of a grip on the world, then that is why we follow what Paul says, to put on the whole armor of God, because you know, if you think about it, the people that say, oh, no, the devil, that's crazy talk. You know, only crazy Christians believe that. Okay, all right, you can believe what you want to believe, but just as sure as there is a sun in the sky that brings light to this earth, this part of the earth anyway, at certain times, just as sure as there is night, there is God and the forces that oppose him, Satan and his minions. And you know, you could say, well, I don't have any evidence to say that I can substantiate that claim. Well, I do. Because when you look around enough to see with eyes wide open, just probably more so in the last few years than all the years before, we've seen an undoing, an attempt to undo everything that God intended for us. An undoing on a level unprecedented. And I've talked about this many times, the destruction of the family as we have known it since the beginning of time. And the destruction of that family, you could say, well, it's motivated by greed. People want more money. Both parents have to work. Or it's motivated by agendas or by sexism or by whatever you want to call it. Doesn't matter. God set something in place knowing what we need, but we are so full of ourselves, we just go out and we do whatever we want. Well, isn't that kind of the definition of sin? And isn't that all we like sheep have gone astray? So the whole picture of redemption painted in here, also seeing, you know, every single one of these has an element, whether it is the goat going down with the fish tail, out of death comes life, or whether we want to look at how much serpent is present in the imagery. That's to say that there's very little left that represents the original image that God gave. There wouldn't be this much. If we understand, and I'm not making this up, and again, somebody says, well, how do we know the Bible's reliable? Well, I'm not telling you that you could exactly verbatim make the connection, but when you start seeing the symbols and the stars being described as they have been, as I've unfolded it, you have a hard time making this anything but the gospel in the stars. And the tragedy is that if people are reading this book, there will come a time when God basically says, time is up. I know a lot of you are curious to know, with the Syrian government kind of in collapse, Assad is out, and there's a new guy that's coming up, and everybody's saying the same thing. Could this guy be the Antichrist? Chill out. Give it a little time. We got to hear how good he talks. If he's saying all these great things and it's all wonderful, you'll know. Because very few world leaders come out and say wholesome, goodly things all the time. This will be like somebody that we go, wow, we'd even want him to be our president, right? Because he's going to say such amazing things. So look for that, but don't get too crazy, because there's been so many false starts to the end. And I'd like to just tell a couple of Christians out there, just chill out and be patient. You know, God will make good on what he said, but that's for God to decide when he does it. We don't get to usher in and decide when. That's God's thing. But when Satan does meet his end, which we do read about in the book of Revelation, when the rivers of unending joy pour forth, proceeding from the throne, when the cherubim will shout, "Holy, holy, holy," we will know one thing: time will be over. When that time happens, time will be finished. There will be no more time. And everything that was left for us to discern, to understand, will really have little or no value anymore, because the one who will fill in all the blanks, who can tell us everything else we need to know, will be here. That's when time stops. So I'd ask the question for those people that are following along. You can see all that God wrote. In fact, I might surprise some of you, I think I've already threatened this, to show you that, as I said, most of these stars identify a name, a function, an attribute of Christ. Redeemer, the pierced one, the wounded one, the victorious one. You keep going, you'll see them all in there. I'd ask you just to think of this, because we tend to think, yes, all those names are there. How does that prove that Jesus exists? Well, I'm going to say this again, and I think probably for the 5th time. If this was pointing to mythological personages, we could clearly identify it. If it was pointing to some other person in history, we could make the associations. But when you look at every single symbol, and remember, they are signs, they're not exact in their, even the drawings themselves are from the artist's mind of what it should look like. But make no mistake about this. This is not some fantasy of, I'm trying to fit things in here. There have been generations before me of great scholars that looked at this subject and said there can be no other explanation for this. Now, I'm smart enough to look at this and think to myself, God did something really brilliant, knowing scribes could mess up and maybe change a word or two, or maybe books would be lost. But the stars, they are there, and they are there as a monument, a memorial that cannot be changed. So when you look into the sky, and somebody might say, well, okay, we still haven't showed me how this ties to the existence of Christ. Well, in the next few messages, I'm hoping to show you, as we can slow down and with a gestalt now, come back and show you with each cycle, with each constellation, with each of the pieces of information inside each of the decans of each of the zodiac signs. You come away with great clarity that there's an unfolding that God gave of the redemption of mankind and the plan for those who still stout-heartedly reject, those that will follow, that is telling us all about his dear son, Jesus Christ. So if you are here with me next time, hopefully we can move through this in a more cohesive way. And I would also like to tell you, just so you're prepared in your mind, there are a lot of people who have asked me these questions. Can you prove that Jesus exists through other mechanisms? And the answer is yes. Probably one of the greatest things, listen, we have Old and New Testament in here. The Old Testament speaks of Christ, and of course, if your eyes are shut and you don't want to hear it, you won't see it. This is the problem with a lot of our Jewish friends. They don't want to see, they don't want to recognize, they don't want to know. But if you really want to be blown away, there are at least 3 passages in the Quran that if somebody was trying to make the case for Islam, right there in the Quran it says, if you are concerned about what's being said in this book, go look at the Bible. I will clarify why that's such a radically powerful thing in the tools. See, this is the thing. If people are not educated, and a lot of people are not, they will espouse all kinds of ideas about the Quran or even the Old Testament. But I can show you enough that even they could recognize Jesus 600 and say 30 years after, or something like 600 years after his death possibly, and recognize him as a prophet, recognizing him as existing. And then there's some cool, really embedded things in there that if you look, you go, okay, so how could a person reading the Quran not go, Jesus is Lord? Oops, okay, well, listen, I don't want to die today, so, so I'll wait until I'm ready to go to explain this. No, I'm actually going to explain it to you because my hope is that there are people out there who have an open enough mind to see that if you're really looking, you know, people say, oh, there's no proof, there's no proof. Well, there's no proof as in if we were looking for, you know, people are talking right now about the shroud and they're saying, well, isn't that some type of proof? Yes, and you have to kind of tackle that head on with the new findings that they have now newly released that completely debunk the old carbon dating and everything else that we knew about the shroud. So you could say, well, isn't that forensic evidence? Isn't that valuable evidence? Yes, but it's one of many pieces that when you start seeing all the pieces that are available, the next time somebody says there's no evidence, do me a favor, just smile. The explanation will be way too long and probably that person doesn't have the capacity to listen to all the abundant proofs that point in the direction of saying, listen, if you're still not sure, I'm going to ask you this one last question. And it's a really valid one, you know, where everybody says, well, can you trust, is the Bible reliable? Can you trust these documents? There has been more written. We are living in the year 2024. There's been more written and more studied and more parsed and more analyzed about the person of Jesus Christ than I believe any other figure that has ever lived or existed. And if you don't believe me, look it up for yourself. The books that are on every dimension of Jesus' life, the missing years, what does it mean in communion? There's so much writing and investigative sources to right down to things like, for example, when people talk about what exactly was Jesus saying when he presents the communion, when they partook communion, which is not the Catholic doctrine. You're not partaking of a person, his blood was still in his veins, but the whole idea is everything in our faith points back to the same place. Yes, Paul said it, if Christ is not risen, our faith is vain, but if Christ didn't exist, what the heck are we doing? And why have so many people written and keep writing and keep talking, and I keep preaching, and I'm the person who picks apart looking for. I approach things looking for error, looking for the aha moment. I'm not saying that I was sought out to disprove the Bible, but I've always got that mindset, and I'm always like, well, it just confirms it again, just confirms it again. So we'll do the same thing looking at the life of Christ, his existence. As I said, we'll take you through historical documents and other studies, but right now, I will see you next week. That's my message. You've been watching me, Pastor Melissa Scott, live from Glendale, California at Faith Center. If you would like to attend the service with us Sunday morning at 11 a.m., simply call 1-800-338-3030 to receive your pass. If you'd like more teaching and you'd like to go straight to our website, the address is www.pastormelissascott.com.